Celtic world has more than its share of the supernatural, legends, and myth, which sometimes cross the line into reality. I tell those tales here on Dark Celtic History. The mystery of the lighthouse keepers of Eilean Mor. h-Eilean Flannach is the Scottish Gaelic name of the small group of islands known in English as the Flannan Isles. Located in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, h-Eilean Siar, also known as the Seven Hunters, they stand just over 20 miles from the Isle of Lewis. They are a bird sanctuary and at times a place of awesome beauty. At others, these remote islands bear the brunt of severe Atlantic storms, which whip the seas into frenzy and force even the hardy gulls to stay sheltered in the cliff-faced crags. For many years they have remained uninhabited, the last residents of any length being the lighthouse keepers, who between 1899 and its automation in 1971 kept the light burning on the highest point of the island group, Eilean Mor. Until the lighthouse had been built between 1895 and 1899, it is probable that h-Eilean Flannach had been inhabited permanently since the days of the Celtic Church. The Celtic Church was predominantly across the Celtic-speaking world in the early Middle Ages, 5th to the 10th centuries. On the island of Eilean Mor is the ruin of an old chapel dedicated to Saint Flannan. However, over many centuries, for many of the Gaelic Hebridean community, the islands have been viewed as a place of superstition and bad luck, a view that was reinforced by the tragic and mysterious events that befell the lighthouse keepers on Eilean Mor in mid-December 1900. Now, it is the fate of the lighthouse keepers in 1900, just over 1 year after the island's lighthouse came into operation, that it was the cause of such mystery and speculation. For all three keepers, Thomas Marshall, James Duquette, and Donald MacArthur, disappeared without a trace. It was on the 15th of December 1900 that the ship Archer, which was sailing for Scotland from Philadelphia, had reported that they had passed the islands. The lighthouse was not in operation. In those days, there was no radio communication between the keepers on Eilean Mor and the shore station of Breastcleet on Lewis. When the lighthouse tender Hesperus arrived on St. Stephen's Day, 26th of December 1900, having been delayed due to adverse conditions, they found the lighthouse abandoned. The first man ashore was relief keeper Joseph Moore, who found no sign of the missing man. His preliminary search revealed the doors of the lighthouse closed, the clocks stopped, the beds unmade, and fire not lit. Returning from the Hesperus with two others, the lighthouse must have felt eerie, having been abandoned without any visible reason. Lamps were all cleaned and filled, and the only thing out of place was a chair by the kitchen table that had been knocked over. A further unusual thing was that two of the keepers' oilskins were missing, but the third set was still in place. The lighthouse keeper's log had no further entries after the day that they had disappeared, and a message on a slate on the 15th of December 1900 indicate nothing unusual as well. The search of the island gave no sign of the three missing men. Searches of the vicinity revealed storm damage on the west landing of the island caused by severe weather, but the log indicated that this had happened prior to the last log entry on the 15th of December. However, a superintendent of the Northern Lighthouse Board, the General Lighthouse Authority for Scotland and Isle of Man, Robert Murid, came to Eilean Mor on the 29th of December 1900, and he speculated what had happened was that the two of the keepers had gone to the western landing stage to secure a box in which mooring ropes were stored. Then, having been joined by the third keeper, an exceptionally large wave had washed them away. However, the real events of the December day will never be known. Why? For example, did the third keeper leave the lighthouse against regulations and without the protection of his oilskins to join his colleagues? It was always made clear that the third keeper should not leave the lighthouse during a storm for any reason. Perhaps, as some have also suggested, he had seen his fellow keepers in trouble and rushed to their aid, knocking over the chair on the way. However, if the men were on the west landing stage, they would have not been able to be seen by anyone in the lighthouse, nor within shouting distance. Strangely, if he was in such a panic, why had he stopped to secure the door of the lighthouse and its compound on the way to help his colleagues? The mystery remained unsolved, and is likely to remain so until the bodies of the keepers are found. However, what has been found is a strange leather journal floating in calm seas by a local fisherman in April of 1901. Not having a good day out fishing, the fisherman, only known by the name Blair, sat back to eat his lunch and contemplate what he would do next, and where he might fish next. While looking out upon the still waters, he noticed something afloat. At first, he told himself not to let curiosity get the better of him, but the disappearance of the lighthouse men was still fresh on the memories. Using a net, he scooped up the leather-bound book and began to examine it, as he suspected it belonged to one of the men from the lighthouse on Eilean Mor. As he turned the fragile pages, he began to read, and the story that leapt off the page sent chills down his back and put fear in his heart. Upon getting to work at the lighthouse, the three men settled down into routine. And as we all know, routine can be very boring. So when they could, the men would explore the island and make their lives go by a little faster. One day, while Thomas was in the lighthouse and not wearing his oilskins, the other two men were wearing their skins and in a completely different mood than earlier. They were happy and joking around, but they would not let Thomas know why. Soon the reason would become all too clear. The door to the lighthouse burst open and a large, muscular man grabbed James and Donald and dragged them outside, where more men and a woman were waiting. James and Donald were on their knees in the middle of a circle of them, while the woman pointed an accusing finger their way. Thomas went out after them, securing the door behind him, and stared on in disbelief, knowing he was outnumbered. Then, without warning, two of the intruders raised fishing spears and plunged them to James and Donald. Thomas was stricken with fear and unable to move or react, afraid he would be killed as well. A couple of the men gathered the now dead bodies of his co-workers and carried them away to a watery grave, while the others turned on Thomas. He was told to say nothing and he could live, and he quickly agreed. But he wanted to know why his friends had to die. Earlier, while out exploring the island, they had come across a young woman sunning on the rocks. Instead of trying to woo her, they chose to rape her. Only after the act was completed did they realize she was a Selkie, which startled them, having seen a mythological creature. The Selkie grabbed up her skins, dove into the water, and the two men, thinking they had gotten away with something, went back to the lighthouse happy. But the Selkie's revenge would come soon. When the male Selkies heard what had happened, they enacted immediate revenge. Thomas made the mistake of sitting down on the rocks outside and immediately writing down all that had happened in his journal, and only minutes after the incident, they returned for him. The last inscription reads, "God help me, they have returned." Blair sailed back to his port as fast as the winds would take him. And just when land came into sight, he heard a thud on the side of his boat. He looked over, and he could see the Selkie reaching for the journal. He was paralyzed in fear. The Selkie turned and asked if he had read it. Blair responded yes. Then the Selkie responded, "Don't be like Thomas." And he turned and swam off. Blair never said a word until he was old and on his deathbed, and then nobody took the rambling of an old man seriously. Events such as this always attract speculation of the supernatural or become embellished as folklore. It is easy to see why. These remote, isolated rocky islands, battered by the howling winds of the Atlantic, the high waves driven restlessly against the cliff faces, the constant screeching of seabirds sounding like lost souls in a storm. It is said that keepers posted to the lighthouse in Eilean Mor after the tragedy never felt at ease there, like they were being watched. It was thought by many who have a dark and foreboding atmosphere surrounding it, and few lamented the automation of the lighthouse in 1971, which meant it no longer had to be manned.